Under the quiet lamps of Bath, a modest dressmaker hides a ruined name behind careful stitches. When the widowed Duke of Harrogate steps through her door with his silent child, time falters. He does not recognize the woman he once vowed to love. She recognizes everything: his voice, his hands, the future she lost. Between them hangs a secret embroidered in silk, a past that refuses to stay buried, a choice between silence and truth, duty and desire. One glance reopens an old wound. One whispered "thank you" awakens hope. What happens when the heart you fled finds you again? Tell us where you're listening from, and what do you love most about period romances. Bath, England, the year of our Lord, 1842. A city of gentle hills, steaming waters, and whispers that travelled faster than the wind. Beneath its immaculate facades and polished manners, lives were mended and destroyed with the same delicate precision used to stitch silk to lace. Mia Pembroke arrived there at dusk, cloaked not in velvet or vanity, but in quiet resolve. The carriage that brought her from London left her before a modest building on Queen Square, its windows aglow with the faint promise of a new beginning. The brass sign on the door read, Miss M. Penrose, dressmaker. A name not her own, but one carefully chosen to protect what remained of her dignity. Inside, the small salon smelled of lavender soap and muslin. Bolts of fabric leaned against the walls like silent witnesses. Cotton, taffeta, satin in shades of dusk and storm. Mia's hands moved swiftly, folding each one with the grace of a woman who had known finer days. She wore a gown of dove-grey wool, plain but impeccably cut, her dark hair gathered into a modest chignon that revealed the soft lines of her neck. Her beauty was no longer that of a glittering debutante, but of a woman tempered by grief and endurance. Her apprentice Clara, a girl of 15 with bright eyes and a heart eager to please, watched her in awe. "Miss Penrose," she asked timidly, "will the ladies here be kinder than those in London?" Mia smiled faintly, though her gaze remained fixed on the needle in her hand. "Kindness," she murmured, "is a luxury, my dear. We shall settle for respect." The clock struck 5. Outside, Bath began its evening ritual. Carriages rattling over cobblestones, parasols closing as the last golden light fell upon the Georgian terraces. Mia looked out the window, her reflection merging with the world beyond. A lady once celebrated, now hidden among her own creations. She pressed her lips together, steadying the tremor of memory. London felt like a distant wound she refused to reopen. A knock at the door broke her reverie. Clara rushed to answer, expecting one of their few patrons, a dowager or perhaps a curious matron. But when the door opened, the world seemed to still. A tall gentleman stood upon the threshold, his silhouette outlined by the dying light. He wore a black frock coat of impeccable tailoring, a cravat tied with restrained precision, and gloves of kid leather. His presence filled the small room before a word was spoken. Behind him, holding his hand, was a little girl dressed in mourning grey, her eyes pale as early frost. "His Grace, the Duke of Harrogate," the man announced himself quietly, as if accustomed to the weight his title carried. Mia's heart faltered. The needle in her fingers slipped, piercing her skin. She did not feel the pain, only the surge of blood to her face. Gabriel Blackthorne. It was impossible not to know him. Even after 5 years, she would have recognized that steady gaze, those shoulders carved by discipline, the way his voice seemed to command the air itself. Once he had whispered her name as though it were sacred. Now he stood in her shop as a stranger, his expression guarded, unaware of the storm he had awakened. "Miss Penrose?" he asked, bowing slightly. "I was told you are the finest modiste in Bath. My daughter requires new attire, mourning suitable for a child." For a moment, Mia could not speak. Her throat tightened, but her training, so painfully acquired, saved her. She curtsied with measured grace. "Your Grace honours me. Please come in." He stepped forward, and the soft scent of his cologne, cedar and faint tobacco, reached her, pulling her back to a memory she wished to forget. A garden at twilight, his hand covering hers, the promise of a future that had never come. The child clung to him, eyes lowered. "Lucy," he said gently, "this lady will make you something beautiful." Lucy did not answer. She hid her face against his leg, a small figure of sorrow. Mia knelt to the child's level, her voice tender. "Do not worry, Miss Lucy. We will choose a color that feels like comfort, perhaps a touch of lavender, your mamma's favorite, perhaps." The little girl lifted her eyes, startled. "How did you know?" she whispered. Mia smiled softly. "A guess, my dear. Only a guess." Gabriel's gaze lingered on Mia longer than politeness allowed. Something in her manner, her refinement, her tone, unsettled him. He could not recall where he had seen such composure, that fragile blend of elegance and restraint. But his grief had dulled his memories, and he dismissed the thought. Mia rose, keeping her distance. "If your grace will allow me to take her measurements," she said evenly, "I can have the first gown ready within a week." "Thank you," he replied, and his voice softened. "My daughter speaks to no one, but she seems at ease with you." Mia inclined her head. Children sense the truth, even when adults cannot bear to look at it. For a fleeting instant, their eyes met. The air between them grew taut, charged with unspoken recognition. He broke it first, turning toward the window. "You must forgive the late hour," he said. "We have come from the countryside, and the journey has been long." "There is nothing to forgive, Your Grace." When he left, the bell above the door chimed softly. Mia remained motionless, her hands trembling only after the echo faded. Through the glass, she watched him lift his daughter into the carriage. The little girl looked back once, raising a small hand in farewell. Mia pressed her fingertips to her lips, as if sealing the moment from escaping. Clara emerged from behind the curtain, wide-eyed. "You know him," she said, almost in a whisper. Mia turned toward the flickering lamp, the golden light catching the tears she refused to shed. "Once," she answered. "I thought I did." The girl hesitated. "And now?" "Now," Mia said quietly, drawing the blinds. "He must never know me." The room fell into silence, save for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the city beyond. In that fragile stillness, Mia threaded her needle once more, the red mark on her finger glistening like a promise she could never speak aloud. She bent over the fabric, her breath shallow, her heart in turmoil. Outside, Bath shimmered in the lamplight, beautiful, deceptive, and merciless, just like the world she had once belonged to. And in the quiet rhythm of the stitches, she tried to sew together what life had torn apart. The following morning unfolded beneath a pale winter sky, its light filtering through the lace-draped windows of Queen Square with a softness that belied the chill in the air. A faint mist curled between the eaves, cloaking the city of Bath in an air of hushed expectation. Inside the modest salon of Miss M. Penrose, silence reigned, broken only by the gentle rustle of fabric and the tick-tock of the small clock resting on the mantel. Mia stood at her work table, fingers threading a fine black silk ribbon through the neckline of a morning gown designed for a child. The garment lay across the polished surface like a whisper of grief made tangible, precisely pleated, delicately hemmed, discreetly beautiful. In each careful stitch she had poured restraint and reverence, as if sewing could somehow offer consolation where words could not. Clara moved quietly around the room, sweeping stray pins and dusting the corners with a care that spoke of loyalty more than duty. Though young, she sensed when Mia's silence was a shield rather than serenity. And today, that silence had weight. The bell above the door chimed softly. Mia's hand faltered over the final ribbon loop. Her breath caught without warning, and she smoothed the fabric as though it were her own trembling heart. Gabriel Blackthorne entered with the same measured authority that had unsettled the stillness of the day before. Dressed in a dark frock coat, his boots damp from the street, he removed his gloves with slow precision. He carried Lucy in his arms. The child's bonnet was slightly askew, her eyes drowsy with the heaviness of recent tears. "She didn't want to leave the house," the Duke said, his voice low, "but she asked for you." Mia's eyes met his for a fraction of a moment, just long enough for something buried to stir. She inclined her head without a word, taking Lucy gently from his arms. The child clung to her without hesitation, resting her cheek against Mia's shoulder, as though it were the most natural place in the world. The Duke watched them closely. There was nothing improper in the way she held the girl, yet there was something profoundly intimate about it. Mia's hands, slender and sure, moved along Lucy's back with a grace that bespoke not only care, but understanding. She murmured something too soft to hear, and the child sighed, her small fingers tangling in the folds of Mia's sleeve. "I've completed the first gown," Mia said, once Lucy had been settled into the nearby armchair. "She may try it now, if she is willing." Gabriel gave a single nod. "She will try it, for you." He said it without sentiment, but the quiet ache beneath his words did not go unnoticed. Clara stepped forward to assist, but Lucy reached only for Mia. Together they moved behind the folding screen at the rear of the salon. Gabriel stood alone, the room around him impeccably arranged, bolts of fabric in rich muted tones, shelves of labelled threads, the faint scent of beeswax polish and lavender sachets tucked discreetly in drawers. It was not an aristocratic space, nor a common one. It felt private, and yet something in its orderliness, in the careful placement of every item, tugged at the edges of his memory. His gaze drifted to the ivory scissors resting on the corner of the work table. He had once given a pair just like them to a young lady with clever fingers and a laugh like sunlight. He closed his eyes for a moment, chasing the image away. It was foolish. That girl had vanished long ago, swallowed by disgrace and the silence that followed. Behind the screen, Mia's hands moved with mechanical grace, fastening the tiny buttons down the back of Lucy's gown. Her eyes lingered on the embroidery she had added at the cuffs, a barely visible line of lavender buds. Morning could be soft, she had told Clara. It need not be shapeless or cold. As she knelt to tie the satin sash, her eyes lifted to the screen's edge. Through the lattice of carved wood, she saw the Duke's silhouette, still and upright. He was facing the window, but one hand was resting on the side table. His hand. The same hand that had once cradled hers on a garden bench at twilight. The same that had touched her cheek with hesitant reverence, as if she were something sacred. She closed her eyes briefly, gathering herself before leading Lucy out once more. The child stood straight, clad now in the new gown. The fabric draped gently, falling just above her ankles. Gabriel turned, his expression unreadable. He studied his daughter, then Mia. "It suits her," he said at last. "She hasn't worn anything this fine in months." "Clothing is more than thread and trim, Your Grace," Mia said, smoothing a wrinkle on Lucy's shoulder. "It teaches posture, discipline, even healing." Their eyes met again, and this time neither looked away. The silence between them was not empty, but brimming, charged with something unspoken. Gabriel reached into his coat and drew out an envelope, his face darkening slightly. He glanced at it but did not hand it over. Instead, he folded it again and returned it to his inner pocket. "Do you ever find Bath to be suffocating?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. Mia raised a brow. "It is quieter than London, and more watchful." He gave a dry, humorless smile. "Yes, watchful. That is the word." At that moment the bell tinkled again. A woman entered, tall and austere, cloaked in a violet pelisse and carrying an ivory-tipped parasol despite the lack of sun. The Dowager Marchioness of Elverton had arrived. Her gaze swept the room like a hawk scanning a field. Mia dipped a curtsy. "Your ladyship." The Marchioness regarded her with narrowed eyes. "I came to inquire about the hemwork on my niece's ball gown," she said, though her eyes flicked briefly toward Gabriel and Lucy. "But I see you are engaged," Gabriel bowed. "Lady Elverton." "I was not aware you frequented dressmakers, Your Grace," the Marchioness replied, a hint of steel in her voice. "For my daughter," he answered evenly. "Miss Penrose was recommended." The older woman turned her attention back to Mia, studying her closely. "You work with uncommon precision, Miss Penrose. I've heard mention of it from Lady Montclair. Tell me, where did you learn such refinement?" Mia did not flinch. "One learns many things in silence, Your Ladyship." The Marchioness tilted her head, amused and intrigued. "Indeed," she turned to Clara. "Send word when the hem is finished." With that, she was gone, but her curiosity lingered like perfume after departure. Once the door closed, Mia knelt beside Lucy again, adjusting a pleat. The child leaned forward, whispering, "May I come back soon?" Mia smiled softly. "If your father allows it." Gabriel watched them. He was not a man given to easy sentiment, but something in that moment unsettled him more than he could admit. "We will return," he said quietly. As he lifted Lucy into his arms again, her small fingers trailed along Mia's sleeve. He offered a final glance, a look layered in shadow and question, and then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. Mia stood still, her hands clasped before her, as though she might steady the storm stirring inside. Clara said nothing. She had seen too much in too short a time. Only as Mia returned to her work table did Clara speak. "You stared at his hand." Mia didn't look up. "It's a craftsman's habit," she lied gently. "One must study the hands of every client." But as she lifted her needle once more, her breath trembled, and the tip of her finger bore the faint sting of a fresh prick, blood beading softly at the edge of memory. The morning began with a brittle sunlight that seemed reluctant to pierce the veil of mist blanketing Bath. The city stirred slowly, its chimneys exhaling smoke like the sighs of restless souls. Within the small but immaculate salon of Miss M. Penrose, the warmth of the fire battled the chill that crept beneath the door, and the faint rhythm of a needle moving through fabric gave the room its pulse. Mia Pembroke sat at her work table, her concentration fixed on the hem of a pale grey pelisse. Her movements were precise, but her thoughts wandered elsewhere, toward a pair of blue-grey eyes that had haunted her since the previous afternoon. Every time she tried to banish them, they returned, shimmering like a forbidden memory she could neither hold nor erase. Clara, bent over a basket of folded muslin, hummed softly under her breath. She looked up when Mia sighed. "The Duke will be calling again today, won't he?" the girl asked, her tone a careful mixture of curiosity and concern. Mia did not answer immediately. "His Grace mentioned a fitting," she said at last, "for the second gown." Clara smiled faintly. "He seems kind, though perhaps too serious for kindness to show easily." Mia glanced toward her apprentice, her lips curving into the ghost of a smile. "He carries the weight of many lives, Clara. It is not an easy burden." "Nor an unfamiliar one," she might have added. Before the girl could reply, the familiar chime of the doorbell interrupted them. Mia straightened in her chair, pressing a hand to her heart as if to steady its flutter. The Duke of Harrogate had entered once again, his tall frame outlined by the pale light behind him. He removed his hat, his expression composed but distant. Little Lucy stood beside him, clutching a small book bound in worn leather. "Good morning, Miss Penrose," Gabriel said with a courteous nod. "I hope the day finds you well." "It does, Your Grace," Mia replied, her tone as calm as she could manage. "And you?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering toward his daughter. "It finds me occupied." Mia understood. Grief had its own vocabulary, one spoken through half-sentences, through gestures and silences. She gestured toward the armchair near the fire. "If Miss Lucy would like to read while I finish the last hem, she may sit there." The child obeyed without resistance, curling into the chair like a small cat. She opened her book, though her eyes soon strayed to the ribbons and lace scattered across the table. Gabriel watched her, a flicker of tenderness softening his severe profile. "She speaks very little," he said, almost to himself. "Her mother's passing stole more than her laughter." Mia's fingers tightened around her needle. "Children heal in their own time," she murmured. "Sometimes they only need to be seen, to be spoken to as though they matter." He looked at her then, really looked, as if her words held a familiarity he could not yet name, and that was when Mia saw it. The cravat. It was tied neatly at his throat, a subtle cream silk embroidered with a pattern of vines so faint it might escape a stranger's notice, but not hers, never hers. Her breath faltered. She knew every curve of that stitching, every turn of the needle that had shaped those vines years ago. She had embroidered it herself by candlelight the night before he had gone away. Her voice caught in her throat before she managed to speak. "That cravat. It is finely made, Your Grace." He glanced down as if noticing it for the first time. "Ah, yes. One of my old ones, I believe. I found it in a drawer only yesterday. I had nearly forgotten it existed." The room swayed slightly before Mia's eyes, though she kept her composure. Forgotten. The word struck her like a quiet blow. She bowed her head over the fabric in her lap, hiding the trembling of her lips. Clara, oblivious to the exchange's undercurrent, entered with a tray of tea. "Would Your Grace care for some?" Gabriel inclined his head, his eyes still fixed on Mia. "Yes, thank you." When Clara stepped away, the air seemed to thicken between them. The faint ticking of the clock filled the silence. Gabriel's gaze lingered on her hands, the same steady hands that guided the needle so gracefully. He wondered, not for the first time, why this woman's presence stirred something buried deep within him, something close to recognition, yet too fragile to trust. Meanwhile, Lucy had put aside her book and approached Mia, her small fingers tugging at the edge of her sleeve. "It's pretty," she whispered, pointing to the pale threads glinting in the firelight. Mia smiled gently. "Do you think so, my dear?" The girl nodded solemnly. Then, in a voice barely audible, she spoke her first word. "Thank you." Gabriel's breath caught. He froze, the teacup halfway to his lips. The word hung in the air, soft and miraculous. Mia's eyes met his, wide with surprise and tenderness. She stroked Lucy's hair with infinite gentleness. "You're very welcome, sweetheart." The child leaned closer to her, resting her head briefly against Mia's arm. It was a fleeting gesture, yet it carried the weight of unspoken trust. Gabriel set his cup down with deliberate care. "You've managed something no one else has," he said quietly. She spoke. Mia shook her head. "She was ready, Your Grace. She only needed someone to listen." He studied her in silence, the faintest crease forming between his brows. There was something about her voice, a calm authority, a warmth that felt hauntingly familiar, and that embroidery on the cuff of her sleeve. He dismissed the thought again. It was impossible. Lucy's eyelids drooped, lulled by the fire's glow. Gabriel rose to lift her into his arms, but Mia stopped him gently. "Let her rest a while," she said. "I'll cover her with a shawl." He hesitated. The shawl she placed over the child was soft and clean, smelling faintly of rosewater and the faintest trace of her perfume. Simple, unadorned, heartbreakingly feminine. Gabriel's voice dropped to a murmur. "You seem to understand her better than most." "I understand solitude," Mia answered, "and what silence can become if left too long unbroken." He turned away then, as though her words had struck a place in him that still bled. After he departed, the room felt emptier than before. Mia leaned against the counter, her hand pressed to her chest. Clara watched her quietly. "You spoke to him as though you knew him," the girl said softly. Mia forced a smile. "I speak to all my clients with respect." "But your eyes," Clara persisted. "They looked as though they remembered something." Mia said nothing. Instead, she returned to her work table, picking up the child's gown again. Her fingers moved automatically, but her thoughts were far away, on a summer evening, on promises whispered beneath an oak tree, on a letter that had never come. As dusk fell, the fire dimmed and the shadows deepened. The faint clatter of carriage wheels echoed outside. Clara broke the silence. "Miss Penrose," she said, hesitating, "do you ever think of leaving Bath, to begin anew elsewhere?" Mia smiled faintly, though her eyes were distant. "No. A woman cannot outrun her shadow, Clara. She can only learn to stand in the light even when it blinds her." The girl nodded, thoughtful. "You speak like someone who wishes to teach." Mia paused, her needle hovering in midair. A gentle spark warmed her expression. "If I could," she said softly, "I'd open a school for girls like us. A place where they could learn a trade, earn their own bread, where no one's future depends on a man's favor or cruelty." Clara's eyes widened. "A school?" "Yes, for seamstresses, for milliners, for women who have nowhere else to go. Work gives a woman more than money. It gives her dignity." There was conviction in her voice, a quiet fire born of suffering transformed into purpose. Clara watched her with admiration. The bell above the door rang again, startling them both. Mia rose, smoothing her skirts. "We are closed for the evening," she began, but stopped short when she saw the man standing in the doorway. He was of medium height, his hair a polished shade of gold, his coat too fine for honest work, his smile too perfect to be sincere. His eyes, grey, calculating, swept over the shop with casual arrogance before settling on her. "Mia," he said softly, the name rolling from his tongue with the familiarity of possession. The world seemed to narrow around her. The fire crackled once, and then fell silent. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I believe you are mistaken," she said evenly. "My name is Penrose." His smile deepened, cruel at the edges. "Ah, yes, Miss Penrose, the dressmaker. How clever of you." Clara took a step forward, alarm flashing in her young face, but Mia lifted a hand to stop her. The man removed his hat with a flourish. "Edmund Vale," he said, bowing mockingly. "It has been some years, has it not?" Mia's breath hitched. She felt the blood drain from her face, but she did not falter. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Vale. Kindly leave." He leaned against the doorframe, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "Oh, I doubt that. The past has a way of demanding conversation." For a long moment, they stared at each other. The ruined woman who had built a quiet life from ashes, and the man who had once lit the fire that destroyed it. Then with a smirk, Edmund tipped his hat and stepped back into the fog. "Until next time, Miss Penrose." The door closed softly behind him. Mia stood motionless, her pulse roaring in her ears. The silence that followed was heavy and merciless. Clara's voice trembled as she asked, "Who was that man?" Mia turned toward the window, watching the shadow of Edmund Vale disappear into the mist. Her reflection stared back at her, composed, pale and fierce. "No one," she said quietly, though her eyes told another truth. "No one at all." And yet, in the faint reflection of the glass, she saw not her own image, but the ghost of a gown long buried in memory, and knew that the past she had tried so hard to bury had finally found her doorstep. The rain had fallen through the night, washing the streets of Bath with a melancholy sheen. Morning rose slow and grey, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and smoke from distant hearths. Inside the modest salon of Miss M. Penrose, the fire burned low, its light glimmering against the brass scissors and spools of thread that lined the work table like sentinels of a fragile peace. Mia Pembroke moved quietly, her face pale but composed. The bell above the door had not rung all morning, though she could usually count on at least one patron by mid-hour. Clara, sensing her mistress's unease, busied herself with pressing fabric, her small hands trembling slightly as she worked. "Bath is whispering," the girl said at last, unable to contain the thought any longer. "Lady Elverton's maid came by for her fittings, and she mentioned that someone has been—" "Enough," Mia interrupted gently, though her tone betrayed fatigue. She set her needle aside, the thread trailing between her fingers like an unspoken confession. "We must not lend shape to idle words." But she had already heard them, even before Clara's timid warning. It had begun 2 nights before, an anonymous column in the Bath Gazette, written with that vicious elegance peculiar to those who destroy reputations for sport. The piece had not named her, but its implication was unmistakable. A mysterious modiste, with the refinement of a fallen gentlewoman, a woman whose virtues were perhaps not as pristine as her lace. The phrasing had been precise, polished, cruel. Mia had recognized Edmund Vale's venom in every syllable. She had burned the clipping that same evening, watching the paper curl and blacken in her hearth, the ink bleeding like poison beneath flame. Yet no fire could consume the humiliation it left behind. Gossip moved faster than truth, and Bath was a city that fed on murmurs. The bell above the door chimed. Mia's heart quickened, but she turned with practiced serenity. Edmund stood framed in the doorway, his gloved hand resting lightly on the handle, his smile that same infuriating blend of charm and mockery. He removed his hat with a flourish, as though entering a drawing room rather than the quiet workshop of the woman he had betrayed. "Miss Penrose," he said smoothly. "How delightful to find you alone." Mia's posture stiffened. "This establishment is not open to every caller, Mr. Vale. State your business or leave." He stepped closer, uninvited. "Still so dignified," he mused. "It's remarkable how scandal never quite manages to dull your composure. One might almost believe you were innocent of the past." Her eyes did not waver. "You have made a habit of twisting truth into something unrecognizable. What more could you possibly want?" He smiled thinly. "A favor, a simple one for old time's sake. I owe you nothing." "Oh, but you do," he said, his voice softening with mock pity. "Your reputation, such as it is, hangs by a thread. A single whisper, a single letter, and all of Bath will know who you truly are. Miss Penrose will vanish, and in her place, poor, disgraced Mia Pembroke." Mia's hand trembled, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "You forget yourself, sir. I have endured worse than gossip." "Have you?" he murmured, leaning in. "Do you imagine His Grace would continue to patronize your little shop if he knew? The widowed Duke of Harrogate, employing a woman once cast out of London society for indiscretions? Oh, Bath would devour you both. The Gazette would see to it." Mia's breath hitched. The mention of Gabriel, his title, his name, sent a shiver of dread through her. She could endure humiliation for herself, but not for him, not for Lucy. The child's fragile peace could not survive another scandal. "What is it you want?" she whispered. He straightened, satisfaction gleaming in his cold grey eyes. "There is to be a commission for the assembly rooms next week, a gown for Lady Trenton, worth a handsome sum. Decline it, publicly. Tell her you are indisposed, or that the work is beneath you. In exchange, I might forget a few unpleasant details of your history." Mia stared at him, the enormity of his cruelty pressing upon her. "And if I refuse?" His smile sharpened. "Then Bath shall remember Mia Pembroke before sunset." He tipped his hat in mock civility and turned toward the door. The faint scent of his cologne lingered after he left, a cloying sweetness that made her stomach twist. When the bell fell silent once more, Clara emerged from the back room, her face pale. "I heard him," she said, her voice trembling. "Every word." Mia pressed a hand to her temple. "Then you know why silence must be our ally now." "No," Clara insisted, surprising her. "Silence protects no one, Miss Mia. If you say nothing, he will think you're afraid, and fear is the language he understands best." Mia looked at the girl, so young, so fierce, and felt an ache of tenderness. "You have courage, Clara. Perhaps more than I did at your age, but the past is not something one battles openly. It stains everything it touches." That night, the storm returned. Wind howled against the shutters, and the fire in the grate struggled to survive. Mia sat at her sewing table long after Clara had gone to bed, her eyes unfocused, her thoughts trapped in the tangle of past and present. On the table before her lay a half-finished gown, rich emerald silk commissioned by Lady Trenton herself. Each pleat represented not just income, but respectability, survival. If she refused the order, the loss would cripple her small business. Yet if she accepted it, Edmund would unleash his vengeance. The needle slipped from her fingers. It struck the wooden floor with a sound sharper than its size should allow. Across the room, a folded letter rested on the mantel, the one Gabriel had left the week before, asking her to adjust the hem of his daughter's pelisse. His handwriting was elegant, restrained, the kind that revealed the discipline of a man who rarely allowed emotion to escape its proper boundaries. But beneath the careful words, she had sensed warmth, even gratitude. She thought of Lucy's small hand in hers, of the child's whispered thank you, of the way Gabriel's gaze softened whenever he spoke of his daughter. She could not let Edmund's malice touch them. When dawn came, pale and uncertain, Mia gathered her shawl around her shoulders and walked through the rain to the post office. There, she sent a brief note to Lady Trenton, citing unexpected illness and regretfully declining the commission. Her hand trembled as she sealed the envelope, but her face betrayed nothing. By midday, the rumour had already begun to spread. "Miss Penrose too delicate for the work," one client whispered. "Or perhaps her health isn't what it once was," another added slyly. Within hours, the city's polite circles were humming with speculation. Gabriel Blackthorne heard of it during his luncheon at the pump room. The Marchioness of Elverton mentioned it in passing, her tone sharp with curiosity. "Your dressmaker seems to have fallen from grace rather quickly, Your Grace," she remarked. "They say she is not who she claims to be." Gabriel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Who says?" The Marchioness raised a delicate brow. "Everyone, it seems, though I confess I never trusted perfection. No woman sews that well without having something to atone for." He set the fork down, his voice measured but firm. "Miss Penrose is an honest woman. I have known deceit before, Lady Elverton, and it does not wear her face." The Marchioness regarded him thoughtfully, perhaps even with a trace of respect. "Then you are fortunate, Your Grace. Few men in your position would risk defending a woman whispered about in drawing rooms." "Few men," he replied, "deserve to call themselves honourable." That evening Gabriel arrived at the salon unannounced. His coat was damp from the rain, his expression taut with controlled anger. "I heard something unpleasant today," he said once Mia had ushered Clara to the back. "You are being slandered." Mia folded her hands, her composure steady. "Rumours are the tax of survival in Bath, Your Grace. They cost less if one does not pay them attention." His eyes searched hers, filled with an intensity that made her pulse falter. "You are not indifferent, Miss Penrose. I can see it." She looked away. "I am only tired." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "If someone has wronged you, I will see to it that they are silenced." The protectiveness in his tone pierced her restraint. For one dangerous instant, she imagined telling him everything, the truth about Edmund, about London, about the love that had once been theirs. But fear held her tongue. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said softly, "but there are battles a lady must fight in silence." He hesitated, then inclined his head. "As you wish. But should the silence grow too heavy, remember that you are not alone." When he left, Mia stood motionless in the doorway, her heart torn between gratitude and despair. The rain had ceased, but the air still carried its fragrance. She could almost hear the echo of his words lingering in the room. From the back, Clara appeared, her expression troubled. "He would help you," she said. "You know he would." Mia turned toward the dying fire, her face illuminated by its faint glow. "Perhaps," she murmured. "But help comes with questions, and questions lead to truth, and truth, Clara—" She trailed off, her voice barely a whisper. "Truth destroys as surely as lies." Outside, the bells of Bath tolled the late hour, their sound solemn and distant. Mia sat by the fire until only embers remained, the orange light dancing across her pale hands. The world beyond her window slept beneath a blanket of silence. But within her heart, the cost of keeping it had already begun to burn. The sky above Bath held a sullen hue, neither stormy nor serene, but heavy with a restlessness that matched the mood within the small shop on Queen Square. The wind pressed against the windows like a beggar asking to be let in, and the lace curtains stirred gently, as if unsettled by the stillness within. Mia Pembroke moved silently around the salon, adjusting bolts of fabric and smoothing the display of morning gowns, her hands performing tasks long mastered, though her thoughts were far from present. Shadows clung to her like threadbare lace, stitched from whispers, threats, and truths she could neither reveal nor bury deep enough. Lucy Blackthorne sat near the fireplace, her small form wrapped in a shawl embroidered with a pale grey border. The fire painted flickering gold across her cheeks, and her long lashes cast soft crescents against her skin. She had not spoken all morning, but Mia had come to understand that silence in a child was not always absence. Sometimes it was observation, the stillness of someone listening with their heart. Clara watched from a corner, her mending forgotten in her lap. She had grown protective of the girl, and fiercely more so of Mia, especially since the day Edmund Vale had darkened their threshold. Since then, Clara had not left Mia's side for more than a few moments, like a young guard standing between past and present. The bell above the door jingled gently. Mia looked up, expecting a delivery boy or perhaps a customer come for alterations, but it was Gabriel. He entered as he always did, shoulders straight, coat damp from the air, eyes sweeping the room not in command, but in constant awareness. Mia noticed at once that he looked more worn than usual, his jaw tenser, his expression clouded. His gaze found Lucy, and for a moment the lines on his face softened. Then he turned to Mia. "I hope we're not imposing," he said. "Never," she answered, her voice smooth but not without weight. "Lucy is always welcome." The child looked up then and rose without a word, crossing the room to Mia. From the pocket of her gown she drew a thin ribbon of blue and a small silver locket, slightly tarnished but still gleaming where the firelight touched it. She extended it to Mia with both hands. "You keep it," she whispered. "It makes the dark smaller." Mia blinked, caught entirely off guard. Her fingers hesitated before taking the locket, the metal warm from the child's hand. She held it gently, as one would a memory returned by surprise. Gabriel approached slowly. "Lucy," he said gently, "that belonged to your mother." The girl nodded. "But she doesn't need it now. Miss Penrose does." His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in that intense way he had when trying to understand something he could not name. He looked to Mia. "She gave it freely," Mia said, her voice hushed. "I couldn't refuse." Gabriel said nothing for a long moment. Then, with more force than necessary, he turned away and crossed to the window, staring out at the rain-slick street. His voice came low and tight. "That locket was given to my late wife by her mother. It was meant for Lucy when she came of age. It is not simply decorative." "I understand," Mia replied softly, clutching the locket as though it might suddenly burn her palm. "I will return it, if you ask me to." Gabriel turned back, his eyes dark. "Why would she give it to you?" "She trusts me," Mia said simply. "I have done nothing to encourage it, but children, they sense truth in people." Something in his expression wavered. The anger gave way to confusion, then to something more fragile. "You wear sorrow well," he said suddenly. "Too well. It makes me wonder what kind of man he was." Mia's heart thudded, slow and deep. "What man?" "The one who made you carry it so gracefully." She met his gaze then, unflinching. "He was a coward," she said after a pause, "and I was foolish enough to believe in him." Gabriel looked away, not out of indifference, but as though her words had struck a place within him not yet healed. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. Without reading it, he crumpled it slightly in his hand before tucking it into his inner pocket again. Mia observed the gesture. "Another letter?" He nodded once. "From my wife's parents. They want Lucy. Officially this time. A hearing." Mia felt the air leave her chest. "And you?" "I will not give her up," he said, "not while there is breath in me." She believed him, every word, and yet she knew how fragile reputation could be, how quickly it could be twisted and used as a weapon. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "may I ask, have you considered what they might use against you?" He stiffened. "They will use everything, my grief, my temper, my choices, my association with this shop." He said it without malice, but the implication hung in the air. Mia looked away, her voice a whisper. "Then you must be cautious." "And you?" he asked. "Will you remain cautious, or will you tell me who you really are?" Mia froze. For one heartbeat, she thought the moment had come. But then Lucy shifted in her chair, the locket still gleaming in her palm, and the spell was broken. "I am no one of consequence," she said. Gabriel stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as if disappointed but unwilling to press. "Then let us keep it that way, for now." When he left, the silence that filled the shop was not peace, but anticipation. Clara turned to Mia once the door had closed. "You should tell him," she said. "He deserves to know." Mia shook her head. "Not yet. Not when the storm is still gathering." Evening came in softly, brushing gold across the floorboards. The city dimmed under clouds the color of slate. Mia was preparing to close when the bell above the door rang once more. She turned, expecting Clara returning from the grocer, or perhaps even Gabriel again. But it was Edmund. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, hair neatly combed, his smirk already in place. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, voice oily with false civility. "But I felt we left our last conversation incomplete." Mia stiffened. "I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Vale, but I have something to say to you." He stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "I hear there is talk of a custody hearing. A dangerous time for reputations, wouldn't you agree?" She said nothing. "I imagine the Duke would not appreciate more shadows cast upon his household, especially shadows he cannot explain." Mia met his eyes. "Do not dare drag him into this." Edmund stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I won't, unless you force me. All I ask is the same as before. Give up your business, leave Bath, disappear, as you should have long ago, or I will see to it that his Grace's name and his daughter's future are stained by your presence." Mia's voice shook, but she held his gaze. "You would use a child to settle your grudge." Edmund's smile never faltered. "You were never worth more than a distraction, Mia. But now you've become a liability. You've always been good with thread. Perhaps it's time to stitch your own escape." He turned, his coat brushing the air as he walked out, as if nothing had happened at all. Mia stood in the center of the room, the locket still in her pocket, her hand trembling as she closed her fingers around it. The dark had returned, and this time, not even Lucy's ribbon might be enough to make it smaller. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Harrogate House in narrow golden bands, casting long shadows upon the floor of the drawing-room where Gabriel Blackthorne sat beside the fire, reading absently from a leather-bound volume he had not truly turned his attention to. His mind had been restless for days, ever since he found the silver locket in Lucy's bedchamber and traced its return not to his daughter's whim, but to the woman who had become so dangerously present in his life, Miss Penrose. There was something in her quiet dignity that stirred a memory he could not quite grasp, like a song half-remembered or a name caught in the wind. Her hands, the way she tilted her head when listening, even her voice, low and steady like the murmur of a stream, unsettled him in ways he could not explain. His thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock of Lucy at the doorway. She clutched a small book and entered with the hesitant steps of a child used to silence. "Papa?" she asked softly. He set the book aside and opened his arms. She climbed onto the settee beside him without a word, curling into his side with the ease of routine. "Is something troubling you, little one?" he asked, brushing a loose curl from her forehead. She nodded. "The man with the pale gloves. He came again." Gabriel stilled. "What man?" Lucy's brow furrowed as she tried to remember. "The one Miss Penrose doesn't like. He smells like sugar and lies." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "What did he do?" "He made her cry." After he left, she sat by the window and didn't move for a long time. Gabriel closed his eyes briefly, fury blooming behind his ribs like a storm. He had kept his distance, told himself he was merely a patron, a benefactor, nothing more. But now, someone had frightened her. Someone had dared to make her cry. "Did he touch her?" he asked, barely able to control the tension in his voice. Lucy shook her head. No, but his words did. That was all Gabriel needed. Later that evening, dressed in dark, formal attire, he made his way to the assembly rooms. Candlelight flickered behind etched glass, and the music of a string quartet swelled from within. The elite of Bath had gathered, wrapped in silks and secrets, sipping sherry and trading gossip like currency. Gabriel strode past them all. He found Edmund Vale standing near the card tables, a brandy glass in hand, his smile too smooth, his presence too smug. "Vale," Gabriel said with a quiet intensity that drew immediate attention. The other man turned, surprise flashing in his eyes, before he offered a slow, mocking bow. "Your Grace, how unexpected." Gabriel didn't waste breath on pleasantries. "You've been tormenting Miss Penrose. You'll stop today." Edmund raised an eyebrow. "Torment. Such an ugly word. I merely reacquainted myself with an old friend." "She is no friend of yours." "She was once," Vale murmured, sipping his brandy. "She was quite something then, though her judgment in men left much to be desired. Present company excluded, of course." Gabriel's fist clenched at his side. "I wonder," Edmund continued, "how Bath would receive the truth of her, if they knew who she truly was. Would your patronage remain so generous?" "Careful, Vale. Are you threatening me, Your Grace?" "I am warning you." A hush had fallen across the nearby crowd. Fans fluttered. Champagne flutes trembled in gloved hands. The air was thick with anticipation. Before more could erupt, a clear, commanding voice broke through the tension. "Gentlemen," said the Dowager Marchioness of Elverton, appearing from the far side of the ballroom like a queen in mourning, "if you're going to draw swords, do it on the lawn. This room is far too crowded for bloodshed." Edmund chuckled and melted into the crowd, his parting glance triumphant and venomous. Gabriel turned to the Marchioness, his chest heaving. "He's blackmailing her." "I suspected as much," she said coolly, "but not all battles are fought with fists, Your Grace. Some require something sharper. Truth." He frowned. "Truth?" The Dowager looked at him with narrowed eyes. "Come to tea tomorrow. You'll want to hear what I have to say." Without waiting for his reply, she swept away, her silks rustling like whispered secrets behind her. The next afternoon, Gabriel arrived at the Marchioness's townhouse, a Georgian structure shaded by ancient trees. He was led to the drawing room, where she sat sipping tea, her expression unreadable. "I don't enjoy meddling," she began, "but when I see a woman like Miss Penrose cornered by jackals, I find myself inclined to act." "What do you know?" Gabriel asked, seated stiffly across from her. "I know that Miss M. Penrose does not exist, not truly. Her name is Mia Pembroke." He stared at her, stunned. "You knew her," the Marchioness continued. "You were courting her once, before your father intervened." The name hit him like a blow. Memories rushed in, a summer garden, a shy smile, hands intertwined beneath starlight. Mia. God. Mia. But she... He stopped. "I thought she'd left the country, vanished." "She was ruined," the Marchioness said bluntly. "Left to survive without title, protection, or family. And yet she did, quietly, dignified, until now." Gabriel stood abruptly, as if the room had become too small. "Why didn't I see it?" "Because men see only what they're allowed to. And she, poor creature, has spent years hiding in plain sight." Gabriel left the townhouse with fire in his veins. Shame, regret, and something deeper, an ache too large to name. Back at the shop, Mia sat beside the window, her travel trunk half packed. Clara stood nearby, pale and pleading. "You can't go," the girl whispered. "Please, Miss Mia, stay, fight." "I've fought enough," Mia replied. The past won't stay buried, Clara, and I won't let it devour you or Lucy. Ooh, you'll break her heart, Clara said. She trusts you, and he... She paused. He looks at you like he's remembering something important. Mia turned away, her eyes shimmering. That's what I fear most. Outside, the sky threatened rain. Inside, the salon felt hollow, a shell of what it had been, a refuge now tainted by fear. As dusk settled, Mia closed the shutters one by one, her hands lingering on the wooden frames. Her heart was heavy with the weight of what might have been, and the inevitability of what must come next. She had survived ruin before. She would do it again. But she had not expected the look in Gabriel's eyes, the one she feared would follow her into exile. Full of questions, unspoken love, and the echo of a name once spoken with reverence. Mia. His Mia. And now perhaps lost to him forever. The sky above Bath was still dressed in indigo when Gabriel Blackthorne stepped from his carriage and walked the length of Queen Square. The lamplighter had yet to extinguish the gaslights, and the pale glow of them made the cobblestones glisten with dew. There was no wind, no movement, only the faint hush of a world not yet awakened. He stopped before the modest shop whose window displays were veiled with drawn curtains. The sign, Miss M. Penrose, modiste, swayed faintly on its hook, as if stirred by something more than air. Gabriel placed a hand against the doorframe, steadying himself. For the first time in years, he was afraid. Not of scandal, nor of the judgment of society. He had long since learned the sharpness of its teeth. What he feared now was silence, the kind of silence that follows a truth spoken too late. He moved around the side of the building, his boots nearly soundless against the damp flagstones, and found the narrow path that led to the rear garden. There, past the ivy-covered wall and the crooked gate, a lantern flickered inside a window above the workroom. Light spilled faintly into the dark, casting long beams across the frost-silvered grass. She was leaving. He knew it as surely as he knew the sound of her voice in his memory. A second lantern burned in the garden, near a stone bench where the lavender had been planted anew. The scent was subtle in the cold air, but unmistakable, delicate and calming. And there she was, Mia Pembroke, no longer Miss Penrose, no longer the illusion he had allowed himself to believe. Stood beside a trunk, its lid open, her hands folding the last of her gowns with quiet precision. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders, and her hair, always so neatly restrained, was beginning to fall from its pins. The sight of her, vulnerable in that moment, undid something in him. He stepped forward. She turned before he spoke, her breath catching. Her eyes widened slightly, and her voice, when it came, was calm but unsteady. "Your Grace." "Gabriel," he said, "please." She looked at him for a long moment, then turned back to the trunk. "You shouldn't be here." "I know. You should be preparing for your hearing, your daughter, your name." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "I've spent too long preparing for things that never mattered. Let me speak, Mia." She did not answer, but she did not stop him either. He exhaled slowly and knelt. Right there, in the damp garden earth, at the foot of the lavender she had planted with her own hands. The gesture was unpracticed, inelegant, and real. "I was going to marry you," he said softly. "You were everything I wanted, kind, intelligent, radiant in ways I did not understand at 25. I was ready to fight for you, ready to build a life beyond the expectations of others. But then," he looked down, the memory sharp, "my father summoned me, told me of the debts, the disgrace, the arrangements he had made to save our name." Mia's eyes did not soften. She stood still as stone. "I tried to refuse," he continued. "I told him I'd rather be ruined than dishonorable. But then he placed my mother's letters in my hands, letters begging him not to let our legacy collapse, letters she had written in her final illness. She believed our family name mattered. That duty came before love, and I—" He looked up at her now, his voice breaking. "I was weak. I let them marry me off to a woman I barely knew, a woman who never loved me and whom I could never love. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I would forget you. Mia's composure flickered, but her arms remained crossed, her spine unyielding. But I never did, he said more quietly now. I never forgot you, Mia, not for one day. The wind stirred then, brushing through the lavender and catching the loose strands of her hair. She looked at him, her lips parted, her expression unreadable. You let me fall, she said at last, without a word, without a letter. I thought it would be kinder to vanish than to explain that I had been bought. Oh, kinder? She repeated, a bitter smile touching her lips. Do you know what kindness looks like to a woman cast from society without cause? It looks like a roof. It looks like a crust of bread and a bolt of wool too coarse to sell. You speak of debts, Gabriel, but I paid a different kind of price, one that does not show in ledgers. He rose slowly to his feet, pain in his gaze. I know, and I have no right to ask anything of you, but I needed to tell you the truth, even if it changes nothing. The silence between them swelled. A candle flickered in the upstairs window. A bird called once, then fell silent. Mia turned away, her hands trembling as she reached for a folded shawl and laid it gently in the trunk. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice quiet. I don't know if I can trust myself around you. You don't have to, he said. Not yet, but let me try. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You think it's simple, don't you? That confession makes the past vanish, but pain doesn't obey intention, Gabriel. Some wounds heal slowly. Some never do. I know, he whispered. I only ask for the chance to prove that I am not the man who abandoned you. Not anymore. She stepped away from the trunk, her arms falling to her sides. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly look at him, not as a duke, not as a client, but as the man who had once stolen her breath beneath the flowering oak in her family's garden. And for the first time since he had re-entered her life, she did not feel anger, only a sorrow so deep it felt like release. I'm not leaving today, she said, her voice barely audible. He blinked. You're not? No, she repeated, but not for you, for Lucy, for Clara. For the woman I've become, who deserves to stay without running. Gabriel's breath caught, but he nodded. He did not move toward her, did not reach for her hand. He understood now the fragility of that hope. I'll wait, he said softly, for as long as it takes. Then with a final glance he turned and walked away, vanishing down the stone path as the sky slowly began to brighten, the first hint of dawn breaking over the rooftops. Mia stood in the garden alone, surrounded by lavender and fading night. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply, letting the scent fill her lungs. For the first time in 5 years, she felt the earth beneath her feet, not as something to flee, but something to stand upon. She was not whole, not yet, but she was still here. And that, for now, was enough. The town of Bath awakened to a storm that did not touch the weather. The skies were dry, the breeze gentle, and yet the streets trembled with anticipation. From the golden doors of the pump room to the whispering alcoves of the assembly rooms, all of society murmured one name, Penrose, and one rumor, that a duke and a seamstress would face judgment before the eyes of the city. By mid-morning, the courthouse was overflowing. Ladies arrived in silks and feathers, their fans fluttering like nervous wings. Gentlemen adjusted their cravats with rehearsed indifference, though their eyes gleamed with curiosity. Even those who claimed disdain for scandal found reason to attend. The gallery held more than idle spectators. It held Bath's hunger, for disgrace, for revelation, for the thrill of watching a woman fall. Mia stood at the edge of the courtroom, her hands clasped before her, the folds of her slate-blue gown immaculate. She had dressed with deliberate care that morning, neither sombre nor ostentatious, but dignified, quietly noble. Her hair was coiled at her nape, her chin lifted not in arrogance, but in defiance of shame. Gabriel Blackthorne sat to her left, his expression carved from stone. In his dark coat and black gloves, he looked every inch the Duke, yet the rigidity of his posture betrayed the storm within. To his right, Lucy sat beside the Dowager Marchioness of Elverton, her small fingers twisting the edge of her shawl, eyes wide with the fear of a child who understands more than she should. Across the aisle, Edmund Vale reclined with the confidence of a man who had orchestrated the moment to his liking. His lawyer stood beside him, waxed and preened, his voice cold as he addressed the magistrate. "We are here, Your Honour, to address the grievous damage to Mr. Vale's name. He has been falsely maligned by the Duke of Harrogate and the woman known as Miss Penrose, though, as we shall see, even that name is a fabrication." A murmur rose from the spectators. The magistrate struck his gavel lightly, and the proceedings continued. Gabriel's lawyer, a measured man with silver hair and eyes sharp as glass, stood next. "We contend, Your Honour, that Mr. Vale seeks not justice, but vengeance, and that the woman he attempts to disgrace has already endured more than the law should allow." Mia listened without blinking. The blood in her veins was ice. She would not tremble. Not today. Edmund took the stand first, his voice rich with practiced humility. "She was once engaged to me," he said. "I broke it off when I learned of her ambition, her desire to rise above her station by attaching herself to men of wealth and power. I did what any man of conscience would do. I protected my reputation." He lifted his eyes to Gabriel, his mouth curving, but she found a new patron, a higher one. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Gabriel's fists clenched beneath the table. Then the Dowager Marchioness stood. The courtroom hushed as she stepped into view, wrapped in a half-mourning gown of lavender silk and grey lace. Her cane tapped softly against the stone floor, but her presence needed no ornament. She took the stand with regal composure. "Let us dispense with theatrics," she began. "I have known Miss Penrose for some months. I found her work flawless, her manners impeccable, her discretion rare. But I became curious. She did not speak like a tradeswoman. She did not carry herself like one. So I inquired." A pause. Then in a voice like winter air, "She is Mia Pembroke, daughter of the late Arthur Pembroke, formerly of Sussex, educated, debuted, engaged and ruined." A wave of whispers crashed through the gallery. The Marchioness waited for silence. "She was abandoned by this man," she continued, gesturing to Edmund. "He concocted lies, severed the engagement, and ensured her ruin. I have in my possession letters he sent to a friend, boasting of his escape and the payments he made to silence a servant who might have testified otherwise." She retrieved the letters from her reticule and handed them to the bailiff. The courtroom watched in stunned quiet as the documents were passed to the magistrate. "I offer these not to reopen old wounds," the Marchioness said, "but because if this trial is to determine character, then let us be thorough." When she stepped down, Edmund's face had lost its colour. Then Clara took the stand. The girl looked small against the oak-panelled witness box, but her voice was steady. "I came to Miss Mia when I was 14. She took me in, taught me to sew, taught me to stand up straight, to read, to balance the ledger. She gave me more than work. She gave me a life." Her eyes darted toward Edmund. "And she never once used the Duke. She never once spoke his name with anything but respect." Mia's throat tightened. She had not expected Clara to speak. Finally the magistrate turned to her. "Miss Penrose, or shall we say Miss Pembroke, you may speak on your own behalf." Mia rose. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, but her voice, when it came, was clear. "My name is Mia Pembroke," she said. "I did not choose to become Miss Penrose. I became her to survive." She turned to the gallery. "You cast me out once, for something I did not do. I was judged without trial, abandoned without cause, but I did not vanish. I learned to sew, I learned to work, I built something for myself." She looked to Edmund. "You broke me, and I made something new from the pieces. And now you wish to break me again." Her eyes swept the room. "I will not let you." Silence. Then A sound. Small. Fragile. Lucy had risen from her seat and walked slowly across the courtroom. Her bonnet slipped from her hair as she approached Mia, and her hands clutched a ribbon. She looked up, her voice soft and certain. "Please don't go." The silence broke like glass. Gasps filled the chamber. Mia knelt and gathered the child into her arms. Gabriel stood, his eyes shining with fierce pride. The magistrate lifted his gavel. "I have heard enough," he said. "This court finds no cause for defamation. The plaintiff's conduct, both past and present, undermines his claim. The charges are dismissed." Applause rose like thunder. The Marchioness nodded once, satisfied. Mia stood slowly, Lucy still in her arms. She looked toward Gabriel, and in that look was something unspoken. Not forgiveness. Not yet, but something close. Recognition. The trial had ended. But the battle for dignity, for belonging, for love, it had only just begun. The courthouse was once again brimming with breathless expectation. Rain had fallen at dawn, washing the cobblestones clean, and now the air was heavy with the mingled scent of stone, damp wool, and late-blooming wisteria. Ladies pressed handkerchiefs to painted lips. Gentlemen murmured behind gloves and newspapers. Every pew was filled. The grand oak doors had opened early, and still people leaned along the hallways, eager for a glimpse of what no society column could capture. The reckoning of a duke, and the redemption of a woman once named Mia Pembroke. But this morning she had not come to speak. It was he who had asked to be heard. Gabriel Blackthorne, Duke of Harrogate, stepped into the witness box with no counsel at his side. His black coat was immaculately cut, but the absence of his customary cravat, the lack of signet ring or family crest, made the gesture plain. He had come not as a nobleman, but as a man. His gaze scanned the room once before settling, for the briefest of moments, on Mia. She sat near the back, hands folded, her face composed but pale. The Dowager Marchioness sat at her side, as did Clara, upright and steady. Lucy was not present. Gabriel had insisted she be spared the weight of what he was about to say. The magistrate cleared his throat. "Your Grace, I remind you that you may appoint counsel." Gabriel shook his head, slow and firm. "I need no one to speak for me today." The room seemed to tighten in silence. "I come before this court not to defend my reputation," he began, his voice low but steady, "but to reclaim my integrity." He looked directly at Edmund Vale, who sat coiled in his chair, his jaw tight. "For 5 years I lived in a prison of privilege. My late father left behind more than debt. He left behind obligations, alliances, threats, spoken in the language of inheritance and ruin. I was given a choice between disgrace and a marriage that would satisfy the creditors and preserve the ducal line." A few heads turned. The gallery held its breath. "I made that choice. I married a woman I did not love, in order to protect a legacy that until recently I believed mattered more than my heart." He turned to the magistrate. "I do not regret my daughter. Lucy is my soul. But I regret that my first act as a duke was to destroy the happiness of the only woman I have ever truly loved." A murmur trembled along the benches. "I knew Mia Pembroke before she was cast out by this society. I knew her laughter, her brilliance, her compassion. I asked for her hand, swore to build a life with her, and then I vanished, leaving her to ruin, to slander, to the mercy of a world that shows none." Gabriel's jaw clenched. The shame etched across his features like stone worn by years of rain. "I did not vanish because I stopped loving her. I vanished because I was too much my father's son, because I believed, wrongly, that duty must come before love." He turned to the room. "That belief ends today." The magistrate leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Your Grace, you are aware that this proceeding is about defamation and legal standing." "I am aware," Gabriel interrupted with respectful firmness. "But the truth is not a matter for solicitors alone. It is the duty of those with power to speak it. And the truth is this: Mia Pembroke has been wronged by this court, by this society, and by me. Gasps echoed through the room. One matron dropped her glove. A gentleman's monocle clattered to the floor. She is not a schemer. She is not a seductress. She is not a social climber. She is a woman who endured injustice with dignity. She built a life from nothing. She taught a child to speak again, and she faced down the man who once promised her love and gave her silence. Mia's hands trembled in her lap. Gabriel's voice softened, but lost none of its weight. I love her still. I have loved her every day of my life. And if this court believes that her ruin was just, then let it condemn me with her, for I was the architect of it. A stunned silence fell. It was the magistrate who broke it. And your stance on the custody petition filed by the Lady Tremaine and her husband? Gabriel drew a folded letter from his breast pocket. They may withdraw it. Lucy has found peace. Not because of tutors or family name, but because of the care of a woman who gave her kindness without obligation. He held the letter aloft. I have spoken to them privately. They have seen her transformation. They no longer wish to remove her from my care. The document was passed to the bailiff. The magistrate reviewed it quickly, eyebrows raised, then nodded. Gabriel's final words came with no flourish. Mia Pembroke is not a woman to be hidden behind a veil of shame. She is not a shadow. She's the brightest light I have ever known. And I stand here, before all of Bath, no longer to protect my name but to honor hers. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Then came the sound. Quiet at first, then rising, a slow, deliberate clap. It came from the Dowager Marchioness, standing in the rear of the room, cane forgotten. Her applause echoed like thunder in a stone canyon. One by one, others followed. Not all, but enough. Edmund Vale's lips curled into something bitter, but his eyes betrayed the knowledge. He had lost. The magistrate banged his gavel. Let the record show that the court finds no basis for the claim of defamation. Furthermore, it rebukes the plaintiff for abuse of process and imposes a fine. This matter is now closed. But in truth, it had only just opened. As the crowd dispersed in murmurs and tears and stunned admiration, Gabriel did not look toward them. He turned instead to the woman in the third row who had not yet risen. Their eyes met. She did not smile, but neither did she look away. And in that stillness, something shifted. He was no longer the man who had left her behind. He was the man who had stood alone, and she was no longer the woman cast out. She was the one Bath had finally seen. The morning light filtered gently through the windows of the modest shop on Queen Square, painting golden streaks across bolts of muslin and satin piled neatly on the central table. The familiar scent of lavender and starch clung to the air, softened now by the faint aroma of beeswax polish. Outside, the city of Bath carried on with the nervous rhythm of post-trial curiosity, but within Mia's shop there was only the stillness of choices waiting to be made. She stood at the window, watching the world pass by with unreadable eyes. Her dress was plain, but elegant, a soft grey trimmed in ivory piping, neither mourning nor celebration. It was the colour of resolve, of a woman who had wept and waited, but who no longer wished to be defined by either. Clara, bustling quietly in the corner, refolded a bolt of blue silk for the third time. Her hands were restless, and she cast frequent glances toward the front door. "He'll come," she whispered, mostly to herself. Mia turned from the window, her voice even. "He needn't." Clara paused, then straightened her shoulders. "Perhaps not. But if he does, it should be your choice now, not his." Before Mia could respond, the bell above the door gave a single clear chime. Gabriel Blackthorne stood framed in the doorway, his hat in hand. He wore no cravat, no sign of rank, save for the quiet confidence that no longer needed display. His coat was dark blue, tailored but lived in, and his eyes, those storm-grey eyes, were steady as he looked at Mia. He did not bow. He did not speak at once. Instead, he stepped forward past the displays of ribbon and lace until he stood before her with the silence of a man who knew how to wait. "I didn't come to purchase anything," he said, voice low. Mia nodded, but said nothing. "I came," he continued, "because I have nothing to sell and everything to offer." Her breath caught, not from surprise, but from the unbearable softness in his tone. "I cannot erase what I did. I cannot change the years you survived without me. But I can build what comes next, with you, not as your protector, not as your rescuer, but as your partner." Mia blinked once, slowly. "I wish to endow your school," he said, producing a folded deed from his coat. "Not as a gesture, but as foundation. You will have land and your name on the charter, full authority, complete freedom." She reached for the document with careful fingers, scanning it only briefly. Then she raised her eyes to his. "You came with no ring," she said quietly. Gabriel's mouth lifted slightly. "I came with no conditions." There was a long silence between them, filled with the ticking of the mantel clock and Clara's small gasp behind the curtain. From the rear door, a small figure burst through with sudden energy, Lucy, in her blue pinafore and frayed stockings, her hair in soft curls pinned at the side with one of Mia's old ribbons. She ran straight into Mia's arms and buried her face against her skirts. "Mama!" she whispered. Mia froze. Her hands trembled where they cupped Lucy's back. And across the shop, near the door, the Dowager Marchioness of Elverton stood with her cane and fur-lined cloak, silent as stone. She had accompanied Lucy on the walk from the townhouse, claiming she wished for air. But now her expression betrayed a quiet satisfaction as she witnessed the moment unfold. Gabriel took a step forward, voice softer than Mia had ever heard it. "I believe she's been waiting to call you that," he said. "And I've been waiting to call you mine." Mia looked down at Lucy, who clung to her as if the floor might vanish beneath her feet. Then she looked at Gabriel. There was no desperation in his face now, only hope, and the humility of a man no longer hiding behind pride. She exhaled slowly. "I accept," she said at last, "not because I need your name, but because I trust the man you've become." Clara sobbed behind the curtain. The Marchioness cleared her throat meaningfully, though she wiped at her eyes with a discreet gloved hand. Later that week, the assembly rooms were prepared, but not for spectacle. There were no flowers imported from the continent, no invitations penned in gold. Only a handful of witnesses stood in the great sunlit chamber where society once whispered Mia's disgrace. Now they watched her walk down the aisle in a gown of her own making. It was cream, with pearl buttons along the back, and a modest train that shimmered like morning dew. She wore no veil. Her hair was swept into a simple knot, adorned with a single sprig of lavender. Gabriel met her at the altar with a look that spoke of every wound, every vow unspoken, now at last fulfilled. The ceremony was brief. No orchestra played, only the echo of truth across marbled walls. Afterward, the guests stepped into the salon for tea and toast. No one gossiped, no one dared. In the quiet hours that followed, Mia returned to her shop, not as Miss Penrose, not as the disgraced lady of a fallen courtship, but as Mia Pembroke, Duchess of Harrogate and founder of the School for Independent Girls. In the workroom, where sunlight slanted through the window and danced across scattered pins, she sat with a needle in her hand and her wedding gown across her lap. With slow, deliberate care, she stitched a small crest into the hem, not at her heart, but near her feet. Two initials intertwined, M and G, surrounded by a circle of thread the color of dusk. It was not for display, it was not for approval, it was for the woman who had returned on her own terms, a life earned, a love reclaimed. The first frost had come early to Bath that year. Outside the city, beyond the murmuring hills and along the winding country road, once trodden by scandal and whispers, a new building stood in quiet triumph. The Pembroke School for Independent Girls now stretched across two wings of honey-coloured stone. its windows glowing with amber light, its chimneys puffing ribbons of smoke into the grey October sky. Inside, in a sun-drenched study, lined with books and half-finished sewing projects, a woman bent over a desk. Her hair was darker now, gathered in a braided knot streaked with silver. Laughter lines fanned from the corners of her eyes, though her gaze remained sharp, clear as ever. Her fingers bore the calluses of a needlewoman still working, still teaching. Mia Pembroke, Duchess of Harrogate, adjusted her spectacles and looked out the window as voices floated up from the gardens below. Girls in aprons and boots scattered across the lawn, chasing autumn leaves between lessons, and at the heart of the chaos stood a little girl of 10, dark-haired and wild-eyed, her pinafore smudged with ink. Lucy, no longer silent, no longer lost, shouted instructions to younger students in a tone that so uncannily echoed the Dowager Marchioness that Mia had to stifle a laugh. "She's built a kingdom of her own," came a voice from the doorway. Gabriel stood leaning against the doorframe, his coat dusted with morning chill, an unopened letter in his hand. Age had not dulled him. It had dignified him. The streaks of grey in his hair only made his smile more devastating, and the fine lines at his temples were etched by peace, not burden. Mia rose and crossed to him, taking the letter without asking. "From the ministry?" He nodded. "Another offer to make the school official, to absorb it into the national curriculum. But I imagine your answer will be the same." She set the envelope aside without opening it. "We answer to no crown, but our conscience." Gabriel grinned and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "As ever, Your Grace." From the hallway came a thunder of little feet. "Mama! Papa!" A boy barreled in, barely 5, with curls the colour of wheat and cheeks flushed from the cold. Thomas, their miracle, born on a spring night that had smelled of lilacs and thunder. Gabriel swept him up into his arms as Lucy burst into the room behind him, rolling her eyes at her brother's dramatics. Mia watched them both, her heart full to the brim. She had once thought herself beyond the right to dream of this, yet here it was, messy, joyful, utterly unscripted. In the quiet corners of society, change had begun to take root. The Dowager Marchioness, still sharp as ever, had become the school's most vocal patron. She had once ruled drawing rooms with fear and precision. Now she taught rhetoric to girls who argued like barristers and stitched like duchesses. Her name now appeared beside Mia's in newspapers that once refused to print either. Clara, now 21, ran the school's apprentice program and had opened her own ribbon shop in town. She refused all offers of marriage, "at least for now," she would say with a smirk, and wrote editorials under a pseudonym, challenging the unfair laws that still lingered. And as for Edmund Vale, no one spoke his name anymore. After the trial, he had vanished into the continent, his title stripped, his reputation soured beyond repair. There were rumours of a gambling scandal in Belgium. Others said he lived in obscurity in Prague. But Bath had turned its back on him as thoroughly as it once had on Mia. Only this time, justice had remained. That evening, as the sun melted into the hills, the Pembroke Harrogate family gathered in the garden behind the school. Gabriel strummed a lute, poorly, and Lucy read aloud from a book of poetry, pausing only to make fun of her father's missed notes. Mia stitched beneath the fading light. A new emblem was taking shape in her embroidery hoop, a thistle for resilience, a flame for truth, a pair of clasped hands surrounded by stars. Thomas crawled into her lap, clutching a velvet scrap from Clara's bin. "Is this for me?" he asked, eyes wide. She nodded. "For your coat. You'll need one soon." "Why?" "Because winter's come," she said, pressing her cheek to his curls. "But we stay warm, together." And in that moment, surrounded by all she had lost and all she had built, Mia felt not triumphant, but whole. The woman who had been cast out had returned not as a shadow, not even as a duchess, but as herself, unshaken, unclaimed, unforgotten, loved. Some stories stay with us long after the final page is turned. Mia's journey of loss, resilience, dignity, and love rediscovered is a reminder that no title, no scandal, no whispering crowd can define who we truly are. She was cast out. She was silenced, but she refused to disappear. Instead, she built something lasting, not just a life, but a legacy. She taught us that second chances aren't given, they're earned through courage, patience, and the quiet strength to keep going when the world says no. Perhaps you felt like Mia at some point, misunderstood, unseen, standing at the edge of a life that once seemed out of reach. If so, let this be your reminder. Healing is possible. Love is not always loud. And the heart, once broken, can become the very compass that leads us home. If you reach the end of this journey with us, type lavender in the comments. Let that be our secret signal that you too believe in redemption, in enduring love, and in the power of rising again. If this story touched you, we humbly invite you to support the team that brings these period romances to life by sending a super thanks on YouTube with any amount you feel moved to share. Your generosity allows us to continue weaving stories full of heart, beauty, and depth. But if a donation isn't possible right now, you can still help us immensely by sharing this story with someone who needs to believe in love again. And before you go, don't miss the other unforgettable love stories we've left for you in the video cards. Each one is a doorway to another time, another soul waiting to be seen, another heart ready to beat again. Thank you for being part of this journey. We'll be waiting for you in the next story.